Hi, my name is McKenna Pasquale, and I'm a software development student graduating in 1 week. For this DIY API small data project, I created a dataset and analysis called Plot Points to explore one big question. What makes a book go viral on TikTok? BookTok has personally shaped what I read. Some of my favorite authors and series were discovered through TikTok. But it's not just about personal recommendations. BookTok has created an ecosystem where indie and self published authors can thrive, selling through TikTok Shop, generating requests for special editions, and inspiring artists to create fan merchandise, illustrations, and more. It has reinvigorated older fandoms and created space for new voices. I collected and cleaned data from 180 viral book titles that trended across TikTok from January through May of 2025. I enriched the dataset using the Open Library API and TMDB API to fill in missing data like publication year, publisher, and adaptation status. Then I ran custom Python scripts to categorize genre tropes, trend reasons, content warnings, diversity representation, and format types. This script does three main things. It reads in my existing book dataset. It uses the Open Library API to fetch more metadata based on the book title. It adds the information to my dataset and saves the result as a new CSV. I used pandas to manage my dataset, requests to talk to the Open Library API, and the time module helps space out the requests so that way I don't overload the server. I load the clean BookTalk data that I created manually. It contains titles, authors, and just some basic tags. I defined a function to search for a book by its title using Open Libraries API. It tries to get the first result that matches. And this loop goes book by book through my dataset. It calls for the search function for each one and updates the row with new metadata like publish year, page count, and author name. I also added a 1 second pause between requests so that way I don't get rate limited or blocked. And after enriching the data, I saved everything into a new CSV file that I then used for my Tableau visualizations. This script helped me fill in the gaps that would have taken forever to track down manually, like missing publication years or page counts. It also let me standardize the data for better comparison between books across personas. This project used a mix of tools: Python for scripting and API integration, Tableau Public for visualizations, Excel for data cleaning, and Canva for presenting design. The tech stack gave me control over both the backend data work and the storytelling visuals. I started small by collecting data from my personal BookTalk feed just to test the structure and enrichment process. Then I expanded the dataset by adding multiple reader personas to see how TikTok's algorithm shapes what each user sees. This helped surface different patterns based on genre preferences and identity. Originally, I had planned to use the StoryGraph API for mood and pacing, but since it wasn't available to the public yet, I shifted over to Open Library and TMDB to enrich my dataset, pulling things like publication year, author information, and adaptation status. I also built a genre mapping function to clean up inconsistencies and create custom categories. This allowed me to tag each book with a primary genre and assign extra labels for formats, tropes, and diversity representation. Once my dataset was structured, I used Tableau to build multiple visualizations that highlight what makes a book go viral, from trending tropes to adaptation trends and identity driven engagement. To understand how BookTalk recommends different kinds of books to different readers, I created 4 unique reader personas. Each one represents a different set of preferences, habits, and communities, and help to reveal distinct trends in what goes viral. Alex gravitates towards fast paced thrillers and Afrofuturism. He follows black male creators who post plot twist wrecks and dark speculative fiction. His feed is full of high stakes stories with strong representation. Kenna, that's me, is a romantasy reader who's drawn to morally gray characters, trauma arcs, and binge-worthy series. My feed is saturated with found family tropes, fake kingdoms, and books that broke me in the best way possible. Tony is a queer reader who leans into magical realism, graphic novels, and small press titles. They're always looking for unique formats and under the radar books, especially those with strong adaptation buzz. Linda prefers cozy mysteries and historical fiction, the kind of stories you'd want to read with tea and a blanket. Her feed leans towards book club favorites, soft character growth, and page turners with heart. Seeing how each of these profiles surface different books really showed how personalized trends are shaped not just by genre, but by identity, community, and emotional connection. One of the biggest takeaways from this project was realizing just how different book talk can look depending on who you are as a reader. This slide shows where each persona's feed overlaps and where it doesn't. I used Venn diagrams to map the shared themes, genres, and emotional pulls that shaped each reader's book talk experience. On the left, you can see how Kenna and Alex both engage with high emotion content and books that go viral, but their feeds split sharply by genre: romantasy and found family for Kenna versus sci-fi, thrillers, and standalone reads for Alex. On the right, Tony and Linda may seem like complete opposites: queer alt-lit versus cozy book club fiction, but they actually share a preference for character-driven stories and niche community buzz. Even though their tastes differ, both Tony and Linda are fans of under-the-radar books, especially ones from indie publishers or told in creative formats. This bar chart breaks down genre engagement across all four personas. You can see how fantasy and romance dominate Kenna and Tony's feed, while Linda leans more heavily into historical fiction and mysteries. Alex's interest in sci fi and thrillers stand out in contrast, but even he shares crossover with some popular fantasy titles. So, while Book Talk often feels like one giant trend machine, this chart makes it clear. It's really a mosaic of niche reader bubbles, each with their own rhythms, values, and viral moments. When we look at which genres are going viral, fantasy is the clear standout, followed by romance, mystery thriller, and historical fiction. But what's especially interesting is how Book Talk readers don't stick to clean genre labels. They gravitate towards emotional tone and tropes. So you'll see things like dark romance with fantasy elements or cozy mysteries blending into historical fiction. On the right, you can see that there are actually more standalone books overall, but that doesn't mean they're driving the trends. Series books, especially in fantasy and romance, tend to generate more buzz with sequels, fan theories, rereads, and world building that keep readers coming back. Even if they appear less often in the dataset, their emotional impact and shareability make them feel bigger on Book Talk. One of the most striking patterns in my dataset is that over half of the viral books featured some form of diverse representation, whether that's racial, gender based, queer, neurodivergent, or cultural. As shown in the pie chart, the most common categories were queer identity and Black or African representation, followed by Latinx, Asian, South Asian, and neurodivergent representation. Book Talk often pushes these stories to the top of reader feeds, especially when the emotional stakes are high and the characters feel deeply real. But there's still a disconnect. Even books that go viral don't always get adapted or picked up by publishers. So, while Book Talk does a great job surfacing inclusive stories, many of them remain niche in mainstream media, showing that visibility doesn't always equal opportunity. When I looked at adaptation status across publishers, one thing stood out. Indie publishers had slightly more titles in development or already adapted than the traditional heavyweights, especially when viral buzz was a factor. BookTok appears to be shifting the power dynamic. Instead of big publishers always deciding what gets adapted, viral momentum can push a book into the spotlight, even if it started small. Fantasy and sci fi were the most likely genres to be picked up, and they spanned both indie and traditional publishers. That crossover shows how genre strength plus fan engagement can overcome platform differences. What was also interesting is that some of the most niche genres, like queer literature or graphic memoirs, were still being optioned, but mostly because of book talk attention. So while traditional publishers still dominate screen deals, especially through long term relationships and marketing budgets, BookTalk can reverse engineer that path, creating adaptation interest from the ground up. So, why do books go viral? To understand what actually drives a book to go viral on TikTok, I categorized trend reasons into several key types. Things like adaptation buzz, emotional tropes, identity based discovery, series momentum, and new releases. What stood out is that the majority of viral books weren't trending because of a marketing push or a publication date. Instead, they trended because of raw reader response. Things like trauma arcs, found family, morally gray characters, or queer joy. The biggest slice of the pie, labeled viral momentum, covers these highly emotional, shareable, and personal reactions. It's not about algorithms alone, it's about readers connecting to something deeply and then passing that feeling on. That human element is what makes Book Talk different. It's not just about what's new, hyped, or sold the most. It's about what stays with readers and gets shared because it meant something. Like any data project, this one had its share of challenges. One of the biggest early issues was messy metadata. Book titles came in with different spellings, missing fields, or strange formatting depending on the API response. I had to do a lot of data cleaning and remapping, especially around genres and trend tags. Some books blurred category lines, so I created custom mappings to reduce overlap and make the dataset easier to analyze. On the tech side, I ran into some hurdles with Python script errors and unreliable API enrichment. The Open Library API was helpful, but occasionally inconsistent. So I had to troubleshoot and build in error handling and check over things manually. Despite those bumps, I did have several key wins. I learned Tableau fairly quickly, which allowed me to build clean, story focused visuals. I also refined my Python scripts to make them more reliable and repeatable. Most importantly, I ended up with a fully customized dataset of over 180 viral books, organized, tagged, and enriched by hand and code. If I had more time, there are definitely a few things I would have done earlier or explored more. One big thing would be cleaning up trend and genre tags earlier in the process. I did not realize how messy the labels would get across sources, and I ended up reworking a lot of the mappings late in the game. Starting with a clear tagging system would have saved time and made analysis easier. I also would have collected a larger sample for each persona over a longer time frame, especially covering the period before, during, and after COVID. That's when book talk and reading habits really shifted, so a comparison across those windows could show how the pandemic changed what readers connected with and how long that impact lasted. Another direction I did not get to explore was global book talk trends and non English titles. Viral books look very different depending on region, and I think international feeds would reveal totally new patterns. Across everything I tracked, one trend was clear: fiction readers, especially fantasy, romantasy, and thrillers, are driving the biggest viral moments on Book Talk. In my dataset, fantasy came out on top as the most shared and reshared genre, especially among series with rich world building and emotionally intense arcs. Adult romantasy, with tropes borrowed from fanfiction, is bringing in a tons of new readers, many of whom didn't even consider themselves fantasy fans before. And the series effect is huge. Readers love getting pulled into a multi book universes they can binge, discuss, and keep coming back to. Even more interesting is that more men are reading fantasy too, which helps push back against the old myth that fantasy is a niche genre or mostly read by women. Book Talk is actively reshaping those assumptions. Book Talk also isn't just about reading, it's shaping the future of what gets adapted. Viral books now come with built in fan bases, and readers are not just recommending stories, they're campaigning for them to be seen on screen. Major franchises like Harry Potter, The Lord of the Rings, The Hunger Games, and Game of Thrones built their empires on fandom momentum, a model that Book Talk is now accelerating in real time. But success isn't limited to fantasy. We've seen romance hit big with Bridgerton, literary thrillers adapted in Big Little Lies, and sci fi classics reborn through Dune. Even Twilight, which was once mocked, is now being reevaluated and rewatched through nostalgic book talk lenses. And Little Women, a book that's been adapted for decades, continues to prove that emotional resonance and timeless tropes still resonate with today's audiences. But while the fan enthusiasm drives trends, diverse books still face an uphill battle when it comes to actual adaptation deals. Visibility is growing, but opportunity still isn't evenly distributed. What started as a handful of viral TikToks has turned into a massive shift in how books are sold, shared, and celebrated. Barnes& Noble has opened over 100 new stores since 2023, and BookTok is a huge reason why. They've started stocking books based on viral trends, not just publish or push, and now they have whole tables labeled BookTok Made Me Read It. Indie bookstores have also seen measurable spikes in backlist sales, especially for books that went viral months or even years after release. Authors who struggled to get traction before have suddenly landed second print runs, special editions, or adaptation deals, all from TikTok buzz. Libraries are adapting too. Many now track viral titles and adjust their purchasing budgets based on TikTok trends. Some even create BookTok specific displays or host events for popular authors discovered on the platform. But BookTok's impact goes beyond sales. It has launched careers, not just for authors, but for book cover artists, narrators, indie editors, and content creators. And maybe most importantly, it's reignited reader culture. People are forming lifelong friendships through fan groups, trading annotations, creating digital fan art and cosplay, and building read community around the books they love. Thanks so much for watching. This was a small data project, but as you've seen, it revealed some pretty big cultural impact. If you're interested in the tools I used or want to explore the code and visualizations, you can check out the project on GitHub at github.com/mpasquale3. For more of my work across design, development, and data, feel free to explore my portfolio at mpasquale.com. And if BookTok has ever nudged you toward a new read, I hope this inspires you to open the next one.